Then Nahum had the cows driven to the uplands, after which the trouble ceased. Not long after this, the changing grass and leaves became apparent to the eye. All the verdure was growing gray. And it was developing a highly singular quality of brittleness. Amy was now the only person who ever visited the place, and his visits were becoming fewer and fewer. When school was closed, the gardeners were virtually cut off from the world, and sometimes let Amy do their errands in town. They were failing curiously, both physically and mentally, and no one was surprised when the news of Mrs. Gardner's madness stole around. It happened in June, about the anniversary of the meteor's fall, and the poor woman screamed about things in the air which she could not describe. In the raving there was not a single specific noun, but only verbs and pronouns. Things moved and changed and fluttered, and ears tingled to impulses which were not wholly sounds. Something was taken away. She was being drained of something. Something was fastening itself on her that ought not to be. Someone must make it keep off. Nothing was ever still in the night. The walls and windows shifted. Nahum did not send her to the county asylum, but let her wander about the house as long as she was harmless to herself and others. Even when her expression changed, he did nothing. But when the boys grew afraid of her, and Thaddeus nearly fainted the way she made faces at him, he decided to keep her locked in the attic. By July, she had ceased to speak and crawled on all fours, and before that month was over, Nahum got the mad notion that she was slightly luminous in the dark. As he now clearly saw was the case with her nearby vegetation. It was a little before this that the horses had stampeded. Something had aroused them in the night, and the neighing and kicking in the stalls had been terrible. There seemed virtually nothing to do to calm them, and when Nahum opened the stable door, they all bolted out like frightened woodland deer. It took a week to track all four, and when they found they were seen to be quite useless and unmanageable, something had snapped in their brains, and each one of them had to be shot for its own good. Nahum borrowed a horse from Amy for its haying, but found it would not approach the barn. It shied, it balked, it whinnied. In the end, he could do nothing but drive it in the yard where the other men used their own strength to get with a heavy wagon near enough a hayloft for convenient pitching. And all the while, the vegetation was turning gray and brittle. Even flowers whose hues had been so strange were graying now. And the fruit was coming out gray and dwarfed and tasteless. The asters and goldenrod bloomed gray and distorted, and the roses and zinnias and hollyhocks in the front yard were such blasphemous things that Nahum's oldest boy, Zinnes, cut them down. The strangely puffed insects died about that time, and even the bees had left their hives and taken to the woods. By September, all the vegetation was fast crumbling to a grayish powder, and Nahum feared that the trees would die before the poison was out of the soil. His wife now had spells of terrific screaming, and he and the boys were in a constant state of nervous tension. They shunned people now, and when the school opened, the boys did not go. but it was Amy on one of his rare visits who first realized that the water well was no longer good. It had an evil taste and was not exactly fotid or exactly salty. And Amy advised his friend to dig another well on the higher ground to use till the soil was good again. Nahum, however, ignored the warning, for he had, by the time, become calloused to strange and unpleasant things. He and the boys continued to use their tainted supply, drinking it as listlessly and mechanically as they did. They ate their meager and ill-cooked meals, and did their thankless and monotonous chores through the aimless days. There was something of stolid resignation about them all, as if they half walked in another world between lines of nameless guards to a certain and unfamiliar doom. Thaddeus went mad in September after a week visit to the well. He had gone with a pail and had come back empty-handed, shrieking and waving his arms, and sometimes lapsing into an inane titter or whisper about, quote, the moving colors down there, unquote. Soon one family was pretty bad, but Nahum was very brave about it. He let the boy run for about a week until he began stumbling and hurting himself, and then he shut him in the attic room across the hall from his mother's. The way they screamed at each other from behind their locked doors was very terrible, according, especially little Merwin, who fancied that they talked in some terrible language that was not of this earth. Merwin was getting frightfully imaginative, and his restlessness was worse after the shutting away of his brother, who had been his greatest playmate. Almost at the same time, the mortality among the livestock commenced. Poultry was turning grayish and died very quickly, and their meat being found dry and noisome upon cutting. Hogs grew inordinately fat, and suddenly began to overgrow loathsome changes which no one could explain. Their meat was of course useless, and Nahum was at his wit's end. No rural veterinary would approach the place. The city veterinary from Arkham was openly baffled. The swine began growing gray and brittle and falling to pieces before they died, and their eyes and muzzles developed singular alterations. It was very inexplicable, for they never had been fed from the tainted vegetation. Then something struck the cows. Certain areas, or sometimes the whole body, would be uncannily shriveled or compressed, and atrocious collapses of disintegrations were common. In the last stages, then death was always the result. There would be a graying and turning brittle like that which beset the hogs. There could be no question of poison, for all the cases occurred in a locked and undisturbed barn. No bites of prowling things could have been brought the virus, for what live beast of earth can pass through solid obstacles? It must only be natural disease, yet what disease could wreak such results was beyond any mind's guessing. When a harvest came, there was not an animal surviving in the place, for the stock and the poultry were dead, and the dogs had run away. These dogs, 3 in number, had all vanished one night and were never heard of again. The 5 cats had left some time before, but their going was scarcely noticed, since there now seemed to be no mice. And only Mrs. Gardner and me pets the graceful felines. On the 19th of October, Nahum staggered in Amy's house with hideous news. The death had come to poor Thaddeus in his attic room, and had come in a way which it could not be told. Nahum dug a grave in the railed family plot behind the farm, and had put therein what he found. There could have been nothing from outside, for the small barred window and locked door were intact, but it was much as it had been in the barn. Amy and his wife consoled the stricken man as best they could, but shuddered as they did so. Stark terror seemed to cling around the gardeners as they all touched. And all they touched and the very presence of one in the house was a breath from regions unnamed and unnameable. Amy accompanied Nahum home with the greatest reluctance and did what he might do to calm the hysterical sobbing of little Marilyn. Zenaeus needed no calming. He'd come of late to do nothing but stare into space and obey what his father told him, and Amy thought that his fate was very merciful. Now and then Merlin's screams were answered very faintly from the attic, and in response it took an inquiring look. Nahum said that his wife was getting very feeble. When night approached, Amy managed to get away, for not even the friendship could make him stay in that spot when the faint glow of vegetation began, and the trees may or may not have swayed without wind. It was really lucky for Amy that he was not more imaginative. Even as things were, his mind was bent over so slightly, but he had been able to connect and reflect upon all the portents around him. He must inevitably have turned a total maniac. In the twilight, he hastened home, the screams of the mad woman and the nervous child ringing horribly in his ears. Three days later, Nahum lurched in Amy's kitchen in one early morning in the absence of his host, staggered out his desperate tale once more. While Mrs. Pierce would listen in a clutching fright, it was little Merlin this time. He was gone. He had gone out late at night with a lantern and a pail for water and had never come back. He'd been going to pieces for days and hardly knew what he was about. Screamed at everything. There had been a frantic shriek from the yard then, but before the father could get to the door, the boy was gone. There was no glow from the lantern he had taken, and of the child himself no trace. At the time, Nahum thought that the lantern and pail were gone too, but when dawn came and the man plodded back from his all-night search of the woods and fields, he had found some very curious things near the well. There was a crushed and apparently somewhat melted mass of iron, which had certainly been the lantern, while a bent bale and twisted iron hoops were beside it, both half fused, half seemed to hint at the remnants of the pail. That was all. Nahum was past imagining. Mrs. Pierce was blank. And Amy, when he had reached home and heard the tale, could give no guess. Merlin was gone, and there'd be no use in telling the people around who shunned all the gardeners now. No use either in telling the city people at Arkham who laughed at everything. Thad was gone, and now Marnie was gone. Something was creeping and waiting to be seen and felt and heard. Nahum would go soon, and he wanted Amy to look after his wife Zenaeus if they survived him. It must all be a judgment of some sort, though he could not fancy what for, since he had always walked upright in the Lord's ways so far as he knew. For over 2 weeks, Amy saw nothing of Nahum, and then worried about what might have happened. He overcame his fears and paid the gardener place a visit. There was no smoke from the great chimney, and for a moment the visitor was apprehensive of the worst. The aspect of the whole farm was shocking. Grayish, withered grass and leaves on the ground. Vines falling in brittle wreckage from archaic walls and gables, and great bare trees clawing up at the great November sky. With a studied malevolence which Amy could not but feel had come from some subtle change in the tilt of the branches. But Nahum was alive, after all. He was weak and lying on a couch in the low-ceilinged kitchen, but perfectly conscious and was able to give simple orders to Zenaeus. The room was deadly cold, and as Amy visibly shivered, the host shouted huskily to Zenaeus for more wood. Wood indeed was sorely needed, since the cavernous fireplace was unlit and empty, with a sort of soot blowing about in the chill wind that came down from the chimney.